All right, everybody. So very good morning to all of you, and a very warm welcome to the big debate format of the LNOD Roundtable. I hope you're all set, because the format in which this works is as follows. I have a very esteemed panel, which I'm going to invite to come and join me up here, and we're going to initiate the dialogue with them initially. And then at various points in time, I'm going to turn the conversation over to the audience. So please feel free to add comments. When I pass it over to the audience, this is not a traditional panel discussion. So don't feel restricted to imagine that the experts are only on this side of the floor. Okay, they're not. Yeah, we want this to become a debate, which really means that we want to hear your views, your opinions, your ideas. So you must feel very free to be able to contradict the panelists if there's something you don't agree with. You feel very free to agree with the panelists if you do indeed agree with it. And whatever is your perspective or the examples or whatever else it is that you have to make the debate more relevant and more real, feel free to be able to jump in to be able to make that happen. I'm only going to ask you to maintain a bit of discipline, even if you're dying to get off your seats to say something, is to be able to wait till I give you a chance to be able to say we turn this over to audience and then jump in. Normally, they're going to be around 6 discussion threads. And like Rajesh was pointing this out to me this morning, that this is such a wide topic, what we've picked for today, that it's going to be, you probably unbundle it and not know how to close it out, right? Because there are going to be so many loose ends at the end of this. And I think the way in which we're going to let this flow is we want it to flow like it should flow, which is to be able to allow everyone to have a say and to feel free to contradict and have a perspective that is different, and feel very free to agree if you do and say what it is that you really have to say. So I'm only going to turn this over to you periodically. When I say turn over to audience, I'll turn it over to you after every 2 discussion threads. So make sure you're making your points in the interim so that you can jump in and you can feel free to contradict something that had been said in the previous thread as well, because it's we're going to take this break every 2 discussion threads, all right? So otherwise it's going to get too long. So we're going to contain it by being able to turn it over to you after every 2 discussion threads. All right, so is this clear? That's how we're going to go. I'm delighted we have the Corporate Executive Board, which is our knowledge partner at the LNOD Roundtable. And we've got Michael here from the Corporate Executive Board, who will hopefully help us tie up some of those loose ends. I'm not too sure. He might just kind of stir up the hornet's nest a little more with what he has in terms of research, but he's going to jump in at the end to be able to give us some validated pieces of information that they have from the Corporate Executive Board to be able to augment the theme that is on the cards today. So I'm very excited to be able to introduce to you the speakers on the big debate today. As you know, our topic is our MBA graduates delivering bang for the buck. I have a disclaimer right at the start, is that all the panelists that you're going to find up here on the big debate are mostly MBAs themselves, okay? So, that includes me. So I want you to know that we're all as much part of the fraternity. Having said that, we're going to try and distance ourselves a bit from it to be able to view things in perspective and to be able to give our views on this very contentious theme. I know this is not something that we have not been talking about within India Inc. for several years. I think this has been a very contentious theme, very contentiously and hotly debated theme. Somehow, the people who seem more animated about this theme are the people who are not the MBAs, the non-MBAs. Having said that, in the recent past, this has become an extremely contentious, source of argument, even among people who have an MBA themselves. And the loads of questions that get raised around, what I call, in some ways, this huge Gordian knot that we've created for ourselves called the MBA program. And now we can't do with it and we can't do without it. And that's where we all find ourselves within the corporate world, which is the reason why it still persists. And it's still a big bone of contention within most organizations, even as organizations feel habituated to visit campuses year on year. This remains a big topic of a bone of contention within organizations. Mixed feedback on whether or not it is working and is this the way forward in terms of building our talent pipelines. So today, to be able to debate this as honestly as possible, I again chose my speakers very carefully. These are people who don't mince their words. They come out and say what they have to say. Vasu, of course, I had the opportunity to meet only recently, but he goes back a long way with Adil, and Adil told me that I will not be disappointed with Vasu's candor and his ability to be able to come out and say what it is that he needs to say without worrying that this is being recorded, and the fact that it is going to be available on YouTube. But I want everyone else, I know you're all people who are managing talent inside your organizations and the rest of that. I want you to know that this will be content that you will view before it goes up on YouTube, all right? So having said that, very delighted to present to you the panelists that we have today. I'm not going to say too much about them in terms of introduction because you already know them. Please put your hands together for Dr. Ritu Anand. Of Tata Consultancy Services, she's the Deputy Head Global HR. And I'm sure you've heard her on very many forums before. Thank you, Ritu, for accepting to do this. Next, I want you to put your hands together for Vasudevan Narasimha, Executive Director, Human Resources from the RPG Group. So thank you for agreeing to do this. I must say, you and me meeting has been elusive for the longest time, but I've heard about you, so I feel like I know you for a very long time. Next, I want to invite someone who I think has been so spotting to do this, and I must let him know that I tried getting the deans and deputy deans of various other leading MBA schools, right, who hesitated a great deal to want to come in and talk on a topic of this kind. And one or two of them said that they were absolutely feeling comfortable to come in, and then at the last minute told me they had something that has come up because of which they haven't come. So I want you to know how much I appreciate you being here. Please put your hands together for Zubin Mullah of TISS. And then last but not the least, very dear friend and also a fantastic speaker, Rajesh Padmanabhan of the Wellspun Group. Please put your hands together for Rajesh Padmanabhan. So we have a screen up here, and I'm going to be showing you some data. I think the topic is something that you're already well versed with, but I want to be able to introduce this with some data before we get right into the topic and I ask you some questions. These are some research findings, and we'll of course get augmented with more when the Corporate Executive Board presents some of their research to us. But here's what we have. The MBA capacity in the country was built based on the projection of a 9 to 10% economic growth. So that was a projection. It's not turned out like that. In the last 5 years, the number of B schools have tripled to about 4,500 or 3.6 lakh seats. It used to be less than 1/3 this number of seats, even about 5 years ago. According to the latest numbers from a study by Business Association ASSOCHAM, about 340 business schools are in the process of either winding down or have already shut shop since 2012. Last year alone, 180 B schools went out of business, another 160 are likely to shut shop this year. Only 10% graduates from Indian business schools, excluding those from the top 20 schools, get a job straight away on completing their program. That is the biggest attraction for students to want to come in and join the program. And the truth is that most schools are not able to offer the placement service. The MBA education has become a fad, fueled by unrealistic expectation and dreams of turning millionaires overnight. Students are not concerned about the quality of education in the institute. They only want to know the placement and salary statistics and the discounts offered on the fee structure, and this has spoiled the entire education system. These are some of the people who got quoted when they actually did the research. The MBA programs offer theoretical courses, lack practical skills required by the corporate sector. The faculty is not good enough, and there's no infrastructure. Only 10% of the graduates are actually employable despite the robust demand for MBAs. Many private schools are just a business model by some management gurus to earn some money out of investment. Many MBA schools are utterly media savvy. They have full page ads in leading dailies. So no prizes for guessing whose money they're burning in there. And in a circuitous way, I'll let you know, which you obviously stuff that you've already deduced, but we'll talk about that a little later on whose money are they burning as they put those full page ad spreads in the newspaper. Lack of quality control and infrastructure, low paying jobs through campus placements, and poor faculty are major reasons for India's unfolding B school disaster. The need to update, retrain faculty in emerging global business perspectives is practically absent in many B schools, often making the course completely redundant. Only 7% MBA graduates from Indian schools, excluding those from the top 20, get a job straight away. So again, this is an even lower statistic than the 10 that we had earlier. As per the latest study, 340 business schools have shut shop. This is something that re-emerges in various studies, that they are all shutting shop. And this year, another 120 expected to go down. And this was, in fact, one of the most celebrated programs of our time. The study has also reiterated the drop in quality of IIMs and other tier 1 students owing to the drop in quality of schooling, making a segment of tier 1 students also unemployable and owing to mismatch of capabilities and aspiration. I want to ask all of you to be able to come in on the first question. I want to know all this that I'm calling out, right? And obviously there are different tiers of MBA schools. Even when I'm saying those that are winding down are perhaps the tier 3 and tier 4 schools. But the fact that there's a wide mismatch between what competence they bring in and the kind of aspiration MBA graduates have in terms of the way they expect to be treated, the way in which they expect to be paid, the whole horse trading demand supply situation that's been created on campuses that compel you to pay an X amount of money if you want to come in on campus to be able to buy these products from, as in essentially hire the MBAs from tier 1 or even perhaps tier 2B schools. I want to know what has been your experience as an organization. Is this what you're experiencing as well? Especially the mismatch between competence and the cost of the MBAs that you're bringing in on board.
So, we've traditionally been a technology company, as all of you know, and we've not really been hiring MBAs for many years. It was only in 2004 that we even thought of hiring MBAs. So as always, we'll catch up very fast, and now we have probably the largest number of MBAs working for us. However, you've said everything what is publicly known already as far as data, so I'm not going to repeat it. I've seen the latest studies also. Personally, I probably am one of the only one or few who is not an MBA, but I don't want to appear as somebody who is taking that stand. So MBAs have an aspiration which very specialized type of companies cannot really provide to them. Number one. We want them to be client facing and relationship building and technically be the hunters for us. But 2004 to 2016 has been 12 years. Hunting is up to a point. Beyond that, delivery, specialization, core competence takes the organization forward. I think this is where the MBA program falls short of expectation of most of the employers who are in a particular space. How long, personally, I have seen them, I manage that program, I seen them getting frustrated after the first 3 years because what was not taught in MBA school is being taught to them in the organization, so that's fine. But after 3 years, they start becoming restless. Then other things take over. And that particular one, we can retain them provided we provide them that learning and growth at the speed that they really want. And at that point of time, the compensation and the career growth becomes the only driver for them. Managing them for an organization like ours is a high maintenance, very problematic job. Despite the fact that I pride myself on an execution capabilities that we have, it's been almost, I would say, a very big challenge. And I'll stop now until I let others speak, and then we'll come back on the other threads.
Sure. Vasu, what's been your experience, both RPG or past assignments? What's been your experience with MBAs?
I mean, I've had a very positive experience on this side, right? I mean, I was looking at your discussion threads. Don't just blame the MBA, schools for.
You speak into the mic so that, yeah.
I said, don't just blame the MBA schools for setting up so many institutions. Every aspect of Indian industry positioned itself for growth of 9%, 10%. So you have excess capacity in steel industry, power industry. Every known industry you look around, you have excess capacity, and they're going down. Aviation industry did the same thing. They're going down. The most significant being Kingfisher's Maल्या, of course. I mean, Malya's in Kingfisher. And whether you like it or not, these things tend to happen. It happened with the hotel industry. It happened with the services sector. Everyone was set for a boom, and this happened in China, and you see the downtrend in China today. You're going to go through the same thing in India as well. And this is part of corporate life. This is part of the reality of doing business. This is part of employment in the life of people, in the here and now and in the future. The second thing is about the quality of education that these institutions provide. I haven't seen a single CEO in my life ever come up to me and say hire MBAs. Their worry is, do I have the right talent? Do I have the right leader? Do I have the right people? Do I have people with the right capabilities? Nobody walks up and says, hire more MBAs, right? It's an HR solution of providing a certain kind of resource to an organization and hope and pray that that solution works, right? And the dilemmas are on both sides. There are many a time an MBA arrives at the organization and he wakes up one morning and says, what am I doing here? Right? Because your employer value proposition or an employee value proposition falls terribly short of their expectation. On the other side, when they land up, every leader who manages these people wakes up one morning and says, what am I doing with these people? Right? So the dilemma is not on one side, it's on both sides. It's a shared pain, I think, at the end of the day. I happened to work in certain industries in India before where we were very, very focused on hiring MBAs. One of them is a very leading paint company, and it's been hiring those people right from those days. But take whether it's Asian Paints, whether you take Hindustan Levers, any of these, Procter & Gamble, they've all been hiring a lot of people at the first level from these MBA institutes. And many of them have succeeded for certain very specific reasons. One is they've had a very consistent approach to the whole proposition. Number two, they've built and developed their proposition and nurtured it to success over many, many years. If you think this is something that you can do overnight, the answer is no. The ability for an MBA person to come and be successful in an organization also depends upon the nature of environment that the organization creates for these people to be able to succeed. And if you don't get that right, you really have a dilemma on both sides, right? I'll end it there.
All right. I'm going to change the track a bit as we pass this on. I'm coming back to you, Rajesh, in just a minute. As we pass this on to Zubin, I'm going to change the track a bit. And I'm going to let the audience know the anecdote that I shared with you on the phone when we spoke, right? So, Zubin and I was talking before, Zubin agreed to be on this panel. And I was telling him about a colleague's daughter, and we have lots of our colleagues whose children want to join the MBA program, like is the case in I would imagine, most organizations. So the colleague's daughter who actually came across to be able to get some career counseling around what it is that she should do next. She was doing her final year engineering when she came to meet me, and seemed extremely confused about why she'd even taken the engineering program. It was a private college in Mumbai. Where in the conversation she even shared that they'd paid capitation to be able to get her a seat in the engineering program because the parents wanted her to do engineering, which is the case with most children. I mean, I'm treating this as an anecdote that actually represents most children and their condition when they make these choices. So when she came to meet me, she'd come to meet me to be able to talk about whether, MBA is for her, and that her dad was keen that she does an MBA, so she had come in to be able to talk about what happens when you do your MBA, what kind of jobs are available to an MBA when they come in, or what kind of program is available to an MBA when they join an organization. So what can they be groomed in, and had all the reservations most people who've gone through technical education before coming into the MBA program have, because they've typically in their syllabus, while they do have the numerical or the analytical orientation because of their engineering program, are very worried about communication and presentation skills and the rest of that, because that's not what their program grooms them to do. They're also of a different personality type because of which they've chosen a technical program and so on. So oftentimes there's that dilemma, and whether they go ahead and do an MBA and fail, and not succeed. So she wanted to come in and understand what was happening. She told me she didn't have the marks to join the engineering program to begin with, but because there was capitation that was paid, she had a seat. She was now completely confused about why she was studying mechanical engineering, but it appeared that the college allocated mechanical engineering to her, so that's what she was studying. She didn't know how that was related to an MBA program, so she even asked me, by the by, at the end of a conversation, she perhaps thought I showed her more empathy than most other people. So she just asked me, what do you guys do here around in HR? And I said, I was a little intrigued with that question, and then I tried telling her what we do in HR. And then she turned around and said, just before leaving, do you think I should do HR? And I said, and because her general orientation didn't appear to be somebody who would actually have an, and you see she has no background at all in psychology, industrial psychology, sociology, anything that could be a building block towards HR. And so I said, well, I don't know, maybe because you've done your engineering, you may want to look at operations management, or you may need to want to look at something else that you want to do. I don't know, do you want to explore perhaps as you do the program marketing? And she said, I haven't thought of any of this thing before, but I'm just thinking, this seems like a nice floor. I mean, I'd like to do what you people are doing here. And it's only by virtue of the 5 minutes where I tried explaining to her what it is that HR really does. Now, here's the story. She goes ahead, and this is no reflection on any school. She goes ahead, and lo and behold, clears the entrance exam of one of the leading schools that offer the human resources program. And we spoke about it. And she called back to say that, you know, I'm delighted to let you know that I've got admission into the school, and I am joining an HR program. I was amazed with that. She went through the HR program for whatever 2 years. During the 2 years, on several occasions, she made it a point to be able to phone me to tell me that she does not find the syllabus in line with what it is that she would really like to do long time. How does one hop off something when you've already started doing it? She found in her summer training that the HR folks get treated most shabbily, that she'd like to be more significant in what it is that she does going forward. So is this a wrong career choice? So full of self-doubt, goes ahead and completes the program and calls me up to let me know that a leading consumer products company has offered her 25 lakhs as an entry-level salary. Goes ahead and joins the company, stays with them for a year and a half, and has now relocated to join a consulting company at 35 lakhs. Now, I just want to know, all right, and this is a fascinating story, and it's one out of the million stories that we have repeated all the time. Leads me to be able to ask the question, and I'm therefore asking you because you're from academia. Do you believe, and you see this objectively, that this is a great program to convert very mediocre students into outstanding products that can be dressed up because you will get a brand name attached to yourself, and then there's a build-up spiral impact, because there is no way 4 years ago I would have imagined that this child can get 35 lakhs from any organization. I can tell you that we would not have hired her with an SR. So just your feedback. We spoke about this on the phone.
So yeah, but I would be quite curious to know your answers. What you said is what HR did.
Right, Zubin?
So I'll just give a little background to what we've been talking about on a larger macro note. If you look at India before 1990s, we had salaries which were regulated. We had very little demand for managerial talent. And then suddenly this economy opens up and we have huge demand for managerial talent, trust towards services. And all of a sudden there's a supply shortage, because of which there are so many players entering the field, some good, some not so good. This coupled with the middle class aspirations of doing well has definitely led to perhaps an excess of supply vis-a-vis demand, which is further compounded by the projections of the economic growth being lesser than what they ought to be. So I think I would agree with Narasimha when he says that this is a natural process of any industry where the capacity becomes much more than what the market can take, and there is likely to be a shakeout. Coupled with that, there are some other patterns in the Indian context. For example, the average Indian student. The average Indian student does not really take ownership for his or her career like the average student in the United States. We still depend a lot on our parents for career. Second is the absence of professional counseling services. Also, our reluctance to perhaps go for those kind of counseling services where we can come to know what's our strength, what's our limitation, which profession I'll be good at. The third is an absence of objective records of managerial life. For example, when a person grows up, they read books about, maybe they see films about police officers, they see films about politicians and other professionals, but how often do we know what is the day in the life of a manager? And there are very few such books written about the day in the life of a manager. We do have management books, but they don't really give us a slice in the life of a manager. And I think the trend is changing. There are many managers who are writing about their lives, and I think that's going to be a huge resource for aspiring students to understand what managerial life is about. Coupled with this, because of this absence of knowledge and the increase in salaries being a huge amount, obviously many young Indian students would like to get, or their parents would like to send their children to business schools. Coupled with this is the other point which you mentioned about you feeling that the student did not have the capability, and then she being picked up from by an institute and so on, is the fact that given the huge pressures of campus placement, which is a mode that has been adopted by both the organizations and the colleges, I think somewhere companies have taken the MBA tag or the institute as a sort of a surrogate for the quality indicators. And they have outsourced the task of selection to the institutes. This is perhaps a very strong statement, but I can't help feel that way when we see the speed with which they make decisions when they are on campus. And I doubt that that would be the same speed at which they make decisions when they are hiring somebody offline. There are very few interviews. The shortlisting is quite, I would say, arbitrary, and it's quite a political process rather than, I would say, a technical process. And I think companies are to blame for that. If you outsource your selection process to another organization, then you have to live with whatever errors are there in the process.
Sure, good point. Rajesh, I know this is coming last to you, but I want to know what has been your experience and what's your view on, is this been your experience, first of all, is there a competence and an aspiration, competence and cost gap in the MBAs that you're experiencing?
Sure. Thanks so much, thanks so much. I think one of the reasons you go last with me is possibly I have a tendency to go out of range. So here we go. First of all, this doesn't exist in isolation. Having been a very active employer across three major sectors, I mean, when I say technology, MBAs, and also the engineering grads across my 3 decades, I can say this is not something in isolation. And it's a triad, as I call it. Triad because employers sit on one side, the student community on the second side, and the academy on the third side. And all three are equally responsible for what's happening. I want to give it a little bit of a positive twist in terms of saying whatever numbers that you've shown are possibly the occupancy rates that we see at a 70% of the demand that has been created. But if the GDP were to again come back to a 9, 9.5 or a 10, I guess we will be back to square one. Then we'll again be scampering for, filling up. So let me go on each of them and possibly try to figure out what has been their contribution to this, good or bad, whatever. And I think all of us have been equally responsible. We have had huge number of successes. We have had massive failures as well. So there's no right or wrong. I think it's some kind of a blended approach that you need to keep on taking year after year. And we've been doing this all along. So let's take the student community. I guess the biggest shift that I see, and this is something which we have to possibly shape in the other two aspects, is no one is searching for a job or a career anymore. Absolutely no one. Absolutely no one. It's an aggregation of experiences, and they're willing to stack up their experiences across different stuff. If it comes from education, so be it. If it comes from project life, so be it. If it comes from building a career, so be it. So it's not just one in isolation. So the entire shift of moving from a career and a job to stacking up of experience is a big one. And I see one more big one that will come, which we'll need to solutionize. If we don't do it now, we'll possibly sit 5 years down the line and think about it. And that is the career transitions that will happen. Nobody is going to end up doing one thing in life. All of us are possibly going to do 3 or 4 different things in life. Some may have had the opportunities, some do not have. So what I'm trying to bring is the career tracks that we have been responsible for making, hiring students from the MBA colleges and saying that these are the tracks that you guys are responsible for is a big, big contribution to their aspiration and consequently the mismatch in terms of their ambition that they bring. Coming to the academia, I'm going to just slice it in one single sentence. What the academia has done is, and whether it's CTC, average CTCs or the branding or the big splashes, the way you said, I think it's chased employment rather than employability. I think so we can speak hours and hours in terms of what the industry and the academia gap is and who should be filling it and what are the kind of the shifting bridge that one should play a role. But I think the focus has been massively on employment.
Yes.
Right or wrong, again, I would never take a position it's right or wrong. Those were the circumstances under which we operated. And employability is coming out as a major gap because it's operating at about a 65-70% kind of an occupancy today. The third one, the corporates have been left scampering because of disruptions in the business model, number one. And with 2 major advancements of globalization and technology as well, massive. Nobody assumed that corporates, which were large corporates, which were the captive users of the MBAs, would undergo such a massive change. Again, a three-set dissection there. Number one, some large corporates continue to remain large corporates and still are very active as far as employment is concerned, will continue to do so. But the startup world has disrupted quite a bit, and that's linked to the experience of the student community. So they are willing to take their chances. Previously, that was not. So you're having a lot of people who are willing to take those startup challenges as a career. And the third one, entrepreneurship also has gone up big time. So I guess we have an opportunity of bringing all of this together and figuring out the convergence is what needs to be done. I guess the solution is going to be very positive, and the MBAs have been left, more generalists, whereas the penetration of getting more into expertise status across the other two sectors have gone deepened in. I guess those are some of the challenges, but you still have a huge interplay amongst this triad set that I'm talking about, and also the generalists and the specialists in terms of solution finding. They have their utility, they have their space. I guess we will need to bring all of this together to put our best foot forward, I guess.
Okay, great. I think at this point I'm going to turn it over to the audience. Can the volunteers be ready with the mics? If you want a mic, just raise your hand. Anybody from the audience, what are your views? What have been your own experiences? If you're somebody who joined on the MBA program, tell us what you want to say about this. If you recently joined an organization after completing an MBA program, tell us what is your reaction to what you're hearing here. Can we move the mic over to anybody who would like it in the audience? Come on, guys, show of hands. Somebody who wants to say something? Yes, come. Excuse me, Asha.
I would like the discussion to be steered towards what is the role of the regulators in the whole MBA education and as well as the technical education. Because what is being said about MBA is equally true about the engineers. And the gap is actually, it's on a time scale I'm saying. The engineer who was 30 years ago passed out of engineering college, the quality that that person had, and today's engineers, there's a drastic drop in the whole product, if we can say that, quality of product. So it is not restricted only to MBAs, it's also good for engineers also. The entire technical education, I would say, and the regulators that AICT and the UGC are there. So I believe that they are not doing their role properly, and that's the whole issue that is there. And all this business about, so many B schools are closing down, the reason is fairly simple, because they opened up. Earlier, that was also a regulated sector, you see. So capacity mismatch is there. Today what happens, you come, the AICT guidelines are there. Anyone comes with those guidelines that I have got a classroom measuring this by this, I have a director's cabin measuring this by this, I have got air-conditioned classrooms, I have the computer lab with these many terminals, and I have a library with these many volumes of books. So these are the criteria. Anyone who fulfills that, they just give the... And that was a philosophy, the chairman AICT said that let the fittest survival, that kind of situation is there. So that is why there was a proliferating growth in the MBA institutes. And then the shakeout phase is there now. So the weaker ones are getting out. Okay. So
Right.
that's what I say.
You're right. Great points, yeah? Yeah. Can we take the mic across? Dr. Vijayanti is from the Wellington School.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering what is the role of the media in creating this kind of a hype among the MBA students when you see the campus interviews in the premier business schools and you see the packages with crores of rupees, and anyone and everyone who's aspiring for an MBA looks at that as a benchmark and feels that whichever institute he joins, he or she would be then entitled to that kind of a job without really knowing what goes into it. And so do you think it's the media hype also that has played its role in increasing the expectations of the aspiring MBAs and the MBAs?
Actually, it very much does, because
today there is no deep dive assessment and evaluation being done by the students to understand that what media is saying and what actually is happening. And I want to add the fourth element to Rajesh's triad, parents. I think parents play a very, very big role in this. While on one side I'll take a stand that 22 years or 21 years is not an age for you to depend entirely on your parents, but by now you should have, through the graduation, done peer level discussions and upward, downward discussions and Google up and everything, and you should be really aware what your aptitude is. I just, knowing the Indian society, I cannot take a stand that parents don't have a role to play. So I think if Rajesh, you draw up that fourth triad into a quadrangle, it will probably make the whole story full and nullify the media impact today that it is happening. And also a contrary or supporting the story which you mentioned, Sujaya, I have a similar story, but I'll extend beyond it. After she has done an MBA, got a job of whatever lakhs that she got, the thought process in her mind is, should I do masters? And I am just stepping back and saying, why the hell is she talking about doing masters? And I spent about a couple of weeks, a month telling her, no, why masters? I am sure MBA is a master's, but what she meant is that I need some sort of a specialization. And I was so glad, because that's what I always have believed in. An engineer, whether he has or she has an MBA or not, she's got something which she can rely on and build upon, either with master's, PhD or a job experience. Many CEOs today don't have MBA. What you need to understand is business acumen and financial acumen, which MBAs teach very well. But what we lack is specialization and the human element, and we'll talk about it in the next thread.
Yes. Okay. Anyone else from the audience? Yes.
Yeah, I would like to add few things. One is we in India, we don't have something called as minor emancipation. Emancipation is freedom from responsibility. In US, when there is a graduation ceremony, the parents feel proud that my son is now standing on his own. He has got a girlfriend. He has got. Yeah, in US. So when you graduate, that happens. Whereas with us, Indian parents, unless kid has not gone through bachelor's, engineers and masters, and then even has his girlfriend, if he doesn't, they have to arrange for it. So that age comes to about 30, 35, even beyond that. So that's too much. So till that point, he's still a burden on parents. And with his tuition fees getting up bigger and bigger, so he doesn't stand on his own feet. So that's one problematic area that we have. Another thing that I wanted to point out is in terms of organizations, when they are looking for hiring, they usually have a criteria or a simple format that, okay, this is our job description, and if the job description matches with the resume, we have got a fit. But that's a very shortcut method of getting things, and the resume will come from the candidates who are there in the management schools. But in the resume there is a piece of a qualification, there is a piece of experience, the intangible piece which is there of skills or skill set, and mostly in in management the intangible skill of business acumen and ability to diffuse into the analysis of a problem, and all those things will come through properly. So that mapping has not yet happened. It's not happened from the academia per se. It has not happened from the employer's point of view, because I see we have Naukri.com, biggest repository of the resumes. We have NASSCOM having a skill building repository already there. India already working on Skill India, which is there. But the mapping of intangible asset has still not happened, and that's the reason we are still not able to. We still see that there is a gap, and then who will fill that gap, or who will at least map that such that we have an identifier that, okay, this is equal to this, and we can very well go ahead and do that. So that's one aspect.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other points? Yeah. Can we get a mic across here?
Talking more in detail onto the campus placements, one, when he mentioned that companies sometimes give the abrupt shortlist and fast shortlist, more than the competition persisting among the students is the competition persisting among the companies to pick up the students. That's how they do it. That's why also it's a major concern there.
Right.
Second thing also, because they are into the race of hiring students, they sometimes don't evaluate everyone before they give out the offers. So it may be that the second performer of a top school may not be as good a performer as a top performer of a second best school. So we don't go to the other schools to check out the quality of the students, where he correctly mentioned that we take the quality through the tag of the MBA institute. And one more deep aspect I would like to mention is that also that colleges also pose themselves as placement providers rather than providing learning and education.
Good point.
Which is a very much a concern today in marketing of schools. Because that's how the, I would say, the thinking process of students as well as their parents are being shaped today.
Correct, which is part of the reason why the parents are pushing for it, because it's going to provide a job or a placement. Anyone else here? Can you get a mic across to her quickly? Can the volunteers move faster on the mic? Can we have one more on this side? One more volunteer on this side with the mics, yeah? Yeah, all right. Go ahead.
Hi. This is further to continuation of this campus placements. I have a big question to the corporates. Is like, I've seen that, there are engineers who don't get job immediately. They feel that doing an MBA, they'll get a big job, big bucks. So they join MBA colleges and do MBA. When it comes to placements, immediately they have been offered jobs worth 20-25 lakhs with the relevant theoretical knowledge what they get from the MBA courses. But I would like to ask the organizations, like, how do they evaluate the candidate just by doing an MBA course? How can they pay such huge amounts without testing their skill sets or whether how they are good at their jobs, without their any relevant experience? How this can be paid to a person who doesn't have 1 year of experience also? How do you, there are engineers, there are so many people who have gone ahead in their jobs and who have been working for 15 to 18 years of experience, but their salaries may be less than what a MBA fresh have. But then how that evaluation is done? There is so much of disparity in terms of salaries. And a person without an MBA must be doing so well in their job. He must be a performer. But just doing an MBA from a reputed institute, how does he get 20 to 25 lakhs at the start without zero experience? How the organization is doing that? The actual, if you see it, the fault lies at the organization's level also. Really, just with the theoretical knowledge, you can get 20-25 lakhs.
Don't forget.
Such a big jump.
Don't forget.
I would
employer rules. Okay. So I think Rajesh has a point, and after that we will see.
No, I think there is just a culture of MBA hiring in all the organizations which is going on, that everywhere there is a must, this plus MBA are preferred.
So, I think
the
you're
only way to
raising.
tackle her passion for the question is through experience.
Absolutely. That's
We just
what
tell
I
her
was
what.
going to say.
Would we continue to do this? Absolutely, we will continue to do this madness. It's all a function of demand supply.
Yeah.
It's a derivative model.
Yeah.
If it works, it works. And we did make that confession. Some things work, some things don't work. So have we made mistakes? Absolutely, we have made mistakes.
Yeah. And
Have we had stars? I can tell you names of hundreds of them whom we have hired as MBA management trainees who are CEOs today. So I guess it works. It works.
Actually, it works.
Disparity of the salaries. A person who goes
So
The
you
person will not come to you. The person will not come to you if you don't pay, and we will need a person, and we will not hire a substandard person because he or she is not coming for 25-35 lakhs. It's a trial and error method. If he doesn't succeed, people who get paid higher get fired also.
Yeah, you're going to jump into the last part. CB is going to
Yes.
make some analysis.
Yes.
But if you were to give me an MBA analytics today, ready-made, I would pay anything. Forget all the campus salaries. I
So
would pay anything.
So, you know what? I kind of empathize.
So I guess, yeah. So
I empathize completely with what you're feeling. That's what sparked off the topic of this debate
But it's a
itself.
nice debate to have.
Yeah. It's a
debate.
and I think it's a useful point, very extremely useful point to make, which is in the normal course, anyone from any other stream is going to take 15 years to make that kind of compensation, maybe 10, if it's a more contemporary organization. So if you came from a graduate program, it's going to take you an awfully long time to be able to make the 25 lakhs. So good question to us. that with this nice demand and supply shortage and this whole situation getting created on campus, I want to ask whether you've ever been to a campus to do any form of campus hiring. Have you? I should tell you about one of the IIMs, and I'm not going to say which one, which we went out to, and this was a couple of years back when I wasn't working with the SR Group. And I must say that the way in which the entire selection process was managed, and we continue going to the IIMs, but I haven't been to each one of them in the recent past. But I must say that the way in which the campus hiring is managed and the kind of shortages that are created on an ongoing basis, which is if you don't tell us now, it's the students who are organizing it themselves. And I must hand it to them on the way in which that whole thing is managed, because there is a shortage created at every stage, which is to say, if you don't tell us now, this one's not available because he's also on the short list of X, Y, Z and ABC company. In fact, because we weren't taking that too seriously, and this was during my British gas days, and we weren't taking this too seriously, and we were saying we want to take our own sweet time to be able to figure things out. We did not have everybody's, they pushed us back big time in terms of administering a psychometric, because they said we don't have time for all this. But we said we're turning these results around quickly, and unless we follow the entire process, we're not concluding on who it is that we want. In fact, we tried negotiating for a wait list as compared to a short list, and they said we don't guarantee, do it at your own risk, we'll not have anyone to give you from the wait list. So if you want to go back at the end of the day today with a wait list, we're really sorry, but it's not our placement rules. We need to know whether you're hiring or you're not hiring. So after all that, we had shortlisted about 9 people who were going to go through the interviews. We'd insisted on the psychometric, we'd invested on group discussions, and we had the last set of panel interviews where we'd involved our directors to be able to come in, to be able to make the selection. So there was everyone who needs to fly down at the same time to be able to make the decision. So we've done all this and lined up all of that, and suddenly I find out of the 9 people that we shortlisted, we had a Sardarji gentleman who'd been through the JD and we shortlisted him. It's only when we were doing the interview, I figured it's not the same Sardarji. And I said, where's my Sardarji? This is not the guy who we shortlisted. They said, oh, he actually got, and then they said it's the same because the names were very similar. And then I figured that the one that we shortlisted through our JD had already gotten selected by one of the consumer products company, which was his preference. So they'd replaced one Sardarji with another Sardarji. So the point I'm making is what you're up against there in that speed at which you need to be able to make the decision. I think it's great because, they psychologically dominate your selection process and try to make sure that you actually either get or you don't get, and then you go away from campus with nobody. And if you've made the plan already to be able to hire MBAs for that year, like Rajesh is pointing out, and if the experience in the past has been, well, we're doing this to build our leadership pipeline, you're not going to be able to go back from any of these places saying we got nobody, because it shows your brand up poorly, that you went out there and you didn't manage to get the people that you wanted to get. So, but good question to ask, what are they doing to deserve the 25 lakhs? I think that is a big and good question to ask. Yes. Got Michael here from the Corporate Executive Board. He's going to take you very breezily through a 15-minute presentation to tell you about what the research says on some of the topics that we've thrown up here today, so that you have validated research. What I presented to you was also all research, but he's going to present to you the Corporate Executive Board research, and they are our knowledge partners. I'm delighted that they have a lot of material available which they wanted to come forth and share today. So this is going to be great value add. We will also have most of this email back to people, to find it on our website. So over to you, Michael Lee.
Thank you so much, Sujaya, for this. Thank you so much to the panel for your, for the wonderful discussion and the audience as well. I think I've been sort of, given a very tough role to sort of keep everyone engaged just before probably the break, and that too with numbers. Yeah, I mean, how many of us really wake up in the morning saying, "Yeah, I'm going to look at numbers"? But anyway, so I have a couple of things to share in terms of, some research that CEB has done. Just for your information, CEB, which is the Corporate Executive Board, is a world-renowned advisory services provider based on the research that we do across all the countries that we operate in. A lot of the things that I've included in the presentation is actually things that we've already discussed. So from that standpoint, I probably won't dwell on it a lot more. You'll probably see a lot of things that have been part of the discussion, so we can skip through that. The key emphasis that we have in this presentation is more from an employer standpoint, and as you can see, we're looking at employability of these graduates, and the word graduate graduates on every slide that you see essentially mean someone with a master's degree. Over here, we're talking about a master's in business administration, but typically what we're looking at is anyone with a +1 in terms of their qualifications. I'd like to spend time in terms of looking at what CEB has to offer in terms of you making the right decision when you're looking at hiring someone who is a graduate. What are some of the things to keep in mind in possibly the recruitment process? And I think we've also spoken a lot about bridge programs and how important that is to ensure that you're getting the most value from your hire, especially from graduates. So that's essentially what we'll cover in two broad areas, talking about some of the key challenges, and I have some global research to share with you, and then moving on to our model of employability for each of these graduates. So, based on what we've already discussed, I don't think you can see this very clearly, but essentially, over the world, what we're hearing from a lot of our, from a lot of graduates is very similar. In the US and the UK, what managers feel is that the MBAs that are coming in, or the graduates that they are hiring, just don't have the right kind of skills to be able to manage. They don't have the knowledge to be able to perform well in their particular jobs. What we're seeing very similar in the Middle East to what we discussed, and I think Ritu made this point on soft skills, in terms of how much is it required for an individual to communicate effectively, as well as showcase his or her knowledge and skills on the job. I think that's one thing that we're seeing. In Canada, a couple of the key challenges are that 1 out of 4 positions are just not filled, largely because candidates get multiple job offers, and I think it's very similar over here as well. You will see some of the research in terms of how stark that is as we go along the presentation. In South Africa, what we're seeing is that the employers are finding a lack of technical skills to be the most challenging area to overcome when it comes to making the most out of their graduate programs. And in China and India, once again, it's very similar. We're just not seeing what we want from the graduates that come into the organization, and as they get into the job, there's a significant mismatch in terms of the expectations from the employer as well as the expectations from the graduate. The impact that this could have, is clearly in terms of volumes of applications. We're seeing a lot of that increase over a period of time. We're finding a significant mismatch in, once again, what the graduates want and what the employers want, and as a result, clearly graduates don't stay within the organization, and we're seeing a significant amount of attrition in that area. And finally, when it comes to really leadership potential, I mean, if you were to think about this, why would you hire someone from an MBA school, whether it is Tier 1 or Tier 4? It is to ensure that you're building a leader for tomorrow, someone who can take either your business or your function to the level that the organization expects it to, and that it's aligned to the vision and mission of the organization. So once again, clearly that is a mismatch that we're seeing in terms of how much of these leadership positions are eventually being filled in by the management graduates. I'll come back to this slide at the very end to talk about maybe some aspects in terms of solutions that you could look at to be able to bridge these gaps as we go ahead. Once again, a couple of research points. This is one thing that I found very interesting as I was going through this, and interestingly, none of us spoke about it. But how much time do you think a graduate spends in understanding the organization that he or she is applying to? Right? Our research suggests that it's in fact only about 1/3 of them spend less than 2 hours researching their organization, and really 2 in 3 would spend up to 5 hours or less. So significantly, from the graduate's perspective, they just don't have enough of an understanding of what they're getting into, which could lead to this mismatch in expectations, right? And once again, we spoke about big data and the amount of data which is available. There really shouldn't be anything which stops or restricts someone from identifying what is it that you're getting into. Now, since we really can't control the behavior of the graduates, there's something that we can do maybe as employers to ensure that we do something to bridge this particular gap. All right. Another, and sort of building on the same points, the graduates really aren't aware of what's going to happen on the job, and that could lead to attrition in the early stages. Finally, when it comes to what the employers are seeing, 1 in 5 graduates apply for jobs that don't match their interests. this, and they're just applying to be able to make it through to the next level. 1 in 2 graduates receive more than one job offer, and once again, from a competition standpoint, this could be challenging because, and I think, an excellent point you raised is in the, in the IIM Institute, which is that you've got, they sort of create this pseudo, shortage of supply, and that's the reason you're quickly forced to make a decision which sort of links into this. Which eventually leads to saying that very few graduates would eventually stay with the organization post-year. And if you think about the investment that you've made, not only in hiring the individual, but also possibly training the individual to get up to a certain level of, proficiency, it begs more of a return on investment, right? Keeping that in mind, these are some of the challenges that we've seen, so I don't want to spend too much of time on that, but this is something that we've already discussed. Moving on to what we can do to be able to possibly deal with the situation and come out on top of this. I think there was one very interesting point made on intuition versus how much effort or how much emphasis you'd want to rely on data. I think currently with the amount of data that's available, there is no doubt that you'll easily have access to a lot of data, whereas traditionally there's also that gut feel which which predicts or which drives a lot of our decision making when it comes to hiring. From CEB's perspective, what we're really looking at in the term that we've coined as informed intuition is that you look at a little bit of both. You take the data that is collected through scientific assessments, while at the same time rely on the art of of hiring an individual. And I think that's really where you'll hit that sweet spot in terms of making the most of the time that you spend with the individual and the return on your investment to hire that particular individual. I'll jump right into one solution that CEB recommends, and when you really break this down, this may seem very intuitive. However, what we've identified in terms of what makes a successful leader as soon as someone joins the organization is answering these two questions. Can graduates get things done? Can they execute on what they're supposed to? Can they take the right steps to be able to get the outcomes and drive the outcomes that is expected of them in that particular role? And while doing so, can they take people along with them? Can they build synergies? Can they collaborate across different departments and organizations or departments within the organization to be able to achieve this? The answer to both of these would help you significantly to decide on how much value should I place on a particular individual, to be able to say that will this person deliver on what he or she is supposed to, at the same time ensure that he or she does it in a manner which is conducive to the environment and also takes the organization along. So clearly, what we're looking at is, a sort of 2x2 grid where you look at the ability to execute as well as to engage. Clearly, what you'd want are people to fit in the top right box, which is higher the potential to execute and engage others. And clearly, that would mean that you're investing a significantly lesser amount of time to be able to get that person up to speed. On the opposite end, you'll clearly find people with much broader areas of development, and hence, it may take much longer for them to be productive in your organization, whereas on the other two diagonals you'll find employees who are significantly high on either the ability to execute or high on the ability to get things done. Right? When you were to translate this into organization results and how effective these individuals are in the organization, it's a no-brainer that the ones in the top right would be as much as 4.4 times more effective and more successful in achieving high-performing roles, whereas the ones in the other quadrants would be a little lesser. What I'd like to point out is if you were to look at the other two diagonals, which is either high on execute or high on engage, they're not too far behind, and there is a strategy that we can employ if we find individuals that fit into either one of these two buckets when you're making the hiring decision. Right? Keeping this in mind, any guesses to how easy it would be to find someone in the top right bucket? How easily do you find someone who's excellent at getting things done and can collaborate well with people, put him on the job, and from day one he's a winner? Very rare, right? Just to put it in terms of some research, right? The likelihood of finding someone is just 1 in 15. And this may not seem like a lot, but when you look at the multiple data points that we have, it's very rare to find someone who can exactly fit that. Hence, what are you likely to be left with? you're likely to be left with someone who fits into either one of these areas. And clearly, from an investment standpoint, you wouldn't want to invest as much in someone who fits in this bucket. Which brings me to the point to say that you're likely to find someone coming out of your B school who fits into either one of these two areas, and that's where the bridge programs can be significantly helpful to ensure that you're providing the right inputs to get one of these individuals to move into this bucket, because you're highly unlikely to get that ready-made solution. Is this resonating with some of us? And probably, like I said, while we're putting this in research terms, it's something that we might be well aware of, but at least that is backed by research that CEB has done. So from a strategy standpoint, what is it that you can look at? It would be, obviously, if you find someone in the top right corner bucket, you need to be able to ensure that, you've got the right, EVP to, get the person on board. But chances are, if you're, sort of hiring and you're looking at individuals in these two buckets, you need to be able to have a strategy to build the talent that you've already bought, to ensure that you provide them with the right amount of inputs through, through their onboarding process, to ensure that they deliver on what is expected. We had this one point in terms of, the research that we shared on, India and China, and how people expect faster promotions from from these two areas. The research that CEB has done to look at what drives the behavior of successful performers in different regions. What you'll see, it's clearly given in the slide, but the one thing that I'd like to point out over here, just to respond to, I think, one of the questions that came up, which says that, is that really true, or what could be leading to this behavior, is that for Asians, the need for status is something which drives a lot of our decisions. And clearly that could, that manifests itself not only in our personal life, but also in our professional working life, and the need for competition. Now, how is it helpful to know this? When we're providing our graduates with job opportunities, as employers, it's essential that we highlight maybe some of these areas, because that that's something that your graduate will be looking for and will be driven to put in more effort to move from one of the two diagonals into the top right box. Right? So this can be a helpful source of information for us to be able to look at how do you want to position the organization as well as the job, by seeing that it matches with some of the drivers that are that are predictors for success in organizations. So really coming back to the slide that I raised over here, one thing in terms of managing volumes and applications, I know we spoke a little bit about the value proposition that the organization can bring in, but that's something on campus that really needs to be looked at. From the point of view of getting the right fit, a lot of organizations that we work with provide something that's called a realistic job preview to the graduates before they get into the interview. They provide them with an opportunity to experience in a simulated manner what is the job they're getting into, what does the organization stand for, and talk about some of the things that they can expect when they get into that role. What we've seen as a result of that is that there is a significant amount of stickability with with the graduates who eventually make it through that process, as compared to if you don't. Hence, to be able to tackle the second box over there, one thing that employers may need to think about is how are you positioning the job? Are you making it as real as possible, providing them with an environment that they will experience in their working life, as well as keeping in mind what are some of the drivers for for success that I showed on the previous slide. And finally, when we look at leadership potential, this is another thing that we probably didn't speak much of, but clearly when you're hiring a graduate, you're not only hiring for today, you really want the person to stick with you and grow into a leader for tomorrow. And I think the execute and engage parameters can be very helpful for us to be able to look at our strategy in terms of how do you identify potential, getting into that zone of informed intuition, relying on data that is collected through scientific methods such as testing and so on and so forth, as well as your own involvement with the individual could be significantly helpful in making that fit happen. Right? So yeah, I'm not sure how much time it took, but that's about all that we have. So
right, super, thank you.
First of all, it's a pleasure to be at the LNOD Roundtable. I think it's a great format. The big debate is a very unusual format, but it has created such a huge possibility for audience interaction, and the participation today was excellent. The subject generates its own passion and divides the room on thoughts and on various views and lenses that people bring to it. But what was great was that, as panelists, we also got to learn a lot in terms of the views that people have, in terms of the kind of opinions that people carry on a subject such as this. So kudos to LNOD Roundtable, to Dr. Sujaya Banerjee for putting this together. And for those of you who are not able to make it here today, I hope you do make it to any of the other roundtable discussions. I find the format enjoyable. I find the whole opportunity to interact and network with people here enjoyable. So it was a very fun time and lots of learning. So it was, I once again thank the LNOD Roundtable for having me here. Cheers.
Okay, the day was extremely relevant. I think we built a very nice conversation in terms of focus, the relevance, and the quality. Quite a lot of takeaways, plenty of interactions, and I don't think there's a perfect solution to situations as this. I guess there were lots of stuff which were aspects of precedences and plenty in terms of future solutions. The important part of it, which I at least tried to build on the entire conversation for the big debate, was three elements. I said, what is the role as far as the student community is concerned? How does academia play a role in this, current and future? And the corporate world, how is it getting reorganized, and what are the elements that would need to be factored into play as we go along? Absolutely no taking away from the fact that this MBA's set that we're talking about has given us immense amount of success. Of course, we have seen a lot of failures as well, but I think the belief in terms of staying put with this also leaves us with multiple opportunities in terms of how we want to look at the future, how we want to look at solutions, cutting this into different sets. In a growing economy as ours, particularly when we're going to be at about 9.5% of a GDP, there's space for everyone, and we need not be running this as a race. For people who missed out, I guess if you can watch the entire footing, there are multiple views that will come from co-panelists, from the audience as well. I think there were plenty of threads which were built and taken to the next stage. There were plenty of reverse takeaways also for me. I guess I learned quite a bit in today's session, both from the audience and the co-panelists, and overall enjoyed. And the interactions were very lively, exuberant, and pretty solution oriented. Thank you so much. I hope you guys watch it and make the most of it as well. And please feel free to get in touch with any one of us if you have a thought or a belief which you would like to share. Thanks.
So I think this big debate format is a great idea. Calling people from different backgrounds on a common platform to discuss an issue which is extremely relevant and has a lot of appeal, contemporary appeal. My message to corporates would be that do not hire from B schools just because of the tag. Spend time in assessing the candidate properly and ensure that you hire the person that you really want. Ensure that you give the candidate a realistic picture of the kind of job that he or she is going to get into, so that you don't have disappointments later on from the candidate's point of view. To candidates, we just saw that candidates spend very little time in deciding which organization they want to go to, and I think that needs to change. You need to spend substantially more time in deciding whether you really want to get into this organization or not, and think in terms of a long-term career rather than a short-term job. That's all. Thank you.